Well, if you imagine what happened in the Americas, in the great United States of America, where the indigenous people fought their settler colonialists for centuries.
Yeah.
And the final process of actually managing them, when they had been defeated, was to round them up and put them into reservations. And these reservations were completely controlled by the jailers, by the conquerors.
Yeah.
What went in, what went out, what they could do. If they came off the reservation, they were in trouble. And they were basically kept in a kind of cold storage, just alive, because that was the end of the process. And this has been used since then, because this was in the mid-late 19th century. It was going on in America. But it was then used in the Boer War, because the British were having terrible trouble actually dealing with the Boers. So they broke the country up into regions, and then they literally, like cattle, they brought the people into these barbed wire reservations. And then there was Libya, where it was used to great effect, because again, the Italians, in their attempt to recreate their Roman Empire and take over Libya as a part of their world, they had a tremendously difficult time in quelling the resistance. So they introduced this process by which, because once you've put the people into an area which you can control, you can gradually limit their movement, little by little. Gaza is just another example of this. The Gazans are in since 2007. They've been in a space which has been completely controlled from air, from sea, from land, and nothing goes in or out. They are totally under the control of the occupier. So this is a horrible process which becomes inevitable when a settler colony is having to deal with the final remnants, if you like, of the people that they are replacing. The first stage is a stage when the settler colonialists set out to civilize a barbaric world. They are going to go out and conquer, and they go and conquer what they believe to be a world that requires them to civilize. In other words, a backward world, a savage world, a wilderness that needs to be tamed. This is the first. So they have to, it is justified on the basis that they are bringing something better. Now, nobody enunciated this more beautifully than Winston Churchill, which when he applied this to Palestine, this is applied to Palestine, and he said, "I do not agree that the dog in a manger has the final right to the manger, even though he may have lain there for a very long time. I do not admit that right. I do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the black people of Australia. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place." So this is the first stage. The second stage is when this settler state decides to legalize itself. and to become a legal entity. And in the case of Palestine, of course, this happened when the Americans forced through the recently established United Nations the bill acknowledging the State of Israel. And at that point, the state, the settler state, takes on a judicial presence,
legitimacy,
yeah. And the indigenous people become terrorists if they oppose it. They are then turned into terrorists. The third stage is when they seriously have to complete the job of dealing with the indigenous people. The final stage is basically either you ethnically cleanse and get rid of the people, or you subjugate them permanently, or you kill them. That's it. There's nothing else. And what to me is interesting is the way that cultures, that settler colonialist cultures and colonial cultures have used, a mechanism they have used to enter that final gear. Because to enter that final process of total elimination, finality, it requires something tremendous. And I believe that the 7th of October was one of these moments, but is not in any way separate. It's not in any way something that is unusual. I want to give you 3 beautiful examples of events which triggered a huge explosion of cruelty and death. The first one I want to talk about is Custer's last stand. The moment when, towards the end of the great resistance of the Sioux Indians and the tribes, I call them Indians because of my generation, but the Sioux indigenous people of America. And they were in Montana, and they'd literally been in this last part, a place where they were able to live as they could live properly. And the treaty was there with the Americans for them to stay there. But then gold was found. And of course, the gold diggers moved in, and the army moved in to break the treaty and to move them on. And they had a great warlord, a great leader in Chief Sitting Bull. He was a magnificent warrior and a very wise leader. And they came together, and the 7th Cavalry was sent under the command of Colonel Custer. And a battle ensued, and the Sioux won a great victory. And the whole of that 7th troop was destroyed. The impact back in Washington was volcanic. This was a catastrophe. And Custer became an emblem of heroic chivalry. His statues went up all over America. His paintings of this last final stand, when he nobly was standing there against all these savages. And the result was, of course, that a huge explosion to destroy the savages, and they sent the army, and they rounded up, and they went through that final process of destroying, crushing all resistance, and placing the Sioux in the reservations. So this is an example where that event triggered this absolute slaughter and demonization. My second example is the Sudan, and is General Gordon. And this is during the Mahdi War. And General Gordon in Khartoum is killed. Khartoum is overcome by the Mahdi's forces, and he's killed in the battle that takes place. And this caused an absolute uproar in London. The newspapers went crazy. Parliament went crazy. This monster had destroyed the sainted Gordon, who was a Christian maniac and who literally became overnight the most famous man in Victorian England. And statues went up to him, and pictures and paintings of him standing at the top of the steps being massacred. And of course the forces that had destroyed him became completely demonized, and the big army was sent from Egypt down into the Sudan, and with their machine guns and everything, they destroyed the Sudanese resistance. So this is a second of my examples of a moment that triggered an explosion of finality. And the third, of course, is what was called by the British the Indian Mutiny of 1857, and which was by the Indians the Great Rebellion, and of course a great rebellion which followed many rebellions, but was the one that very nearly succeeded. And the event was when, I'll just read it here because the Black Hole of Calcutta refers to a prison cell which was used to hold 146 mostly British prisoners captured after the Nawab of Bengal had taken over the city from the East India Company. Interred on 20th of June 1756 in a tiny cell in Fort William, 123 of the prisoners died of dehydration and suffocation. And this became the 7th of October.
Yeah.
This became the moment when the Indians turned into monsters, full monsters. And the battle, the reaction back from England was huge. Delhi was decimated. The beautiful city of Delhi, a city of such scholarship, was destroyed. Charles Dickens, who you would have imagined would have taken a sympathetic view. His letter, which he wrote, which I'll read now. I wish I were commander-in-chief over there in India. I would address that oriental character which must be powerfully spoken to in something like the following, which should be vigorously translated in all native dialects. I, the inimitable, holding this office of mine and firmly believing that I hold it by the permission of heaven and not by the appointment of Satan, have the honour to inform you Hindu gentry that it is my intention, with all possible avoidance of unnecessary cruelty and with all merciful swiftness of execution, to exterminate the race from the face of the earth, which disfigured the earth with the late abominable atrocities. 2,000 British killed in the 1857 Indian War of Independence. Only 2,000.
Yeah.
Compared to many, obviously, of the Indians. But that event, again, the Black Hole of Calcutta, was the trigger event. So as far as I'm concerned, the 7th of October is simply the trigger event of the third act of the settler colonial project.